the so-called fake ceasefire in the failed non-state of Lebanon, where, as I understood from the news today, both the US and France are claiming that Israel, of all people, of all sides, is has been
Violate.
violating the ceasefire. Uh, to put a more correct spin on that statement, Israel responded to tens, if not hundreds, of violations of that so-called ceasefire by Hezbollah in the areas referred to in that agreement. And they responded by attacking certain Hezbollah terrorists who were in infiltrating the areas where they were not supposed to be, according to the agreement, or they were transporting weaponry, etc. So we of course, not surprisingly, have been accused of violating the ceasefire, not the other side, interestingly enough.
Quite predictably.
Yes, and I never believed, and I still do not believe, that the ceasefire will be very longevous. But there is a question here, and that is, what if President-elect Trump, when he enters the White House in not too long from now, one hopes, if they don't somehow remove him from the equation before that happens, and I still do not, um, I do not suggest that that could not happen before January 20th. What if Trump wishes to maintain this bogus and fake ceasefire to our detriment?
I might just add to that both Amos Hochstein, the American diplomat responsible for this nightmare of a ceasefire, and the French foreign minister were both shown videos of Hezbollah, large Hezbollah rocket launchers, the type that can fire missiles into central Israel, coming south and being destroyed by our drones and aircraft, fixed wing aircraft. And they completely disregarded it. They didn't see it. And it was only our violations, alleged violations, that they were willing to talk about. Okay. The issue here we should remember, there are two things quickly to remember. Number one, President Trump prides himself on being a president who ends wars, who doesn't start them. This is number one. Number two, he's just appointed, as we say in, I guess, Hebrew or Yiddish. I don't know where the etymology of the word is. The Mechutan. I think that's Yiddish. Mechutan.
Actually, it's actually Hebrew. It's
It is
Mechuthan
Hebrew. Okay.
And in Yiddish, it's pronounced as Mechutan, but it means
Mechut.
an in-law.
Yeah.
His in-law. His in-law.
His in-law.
The
This is the
Lebanese
father.
business.
Right. The father of his son-in-law is a Lebanese gentleman by the name of Masad Bulos, a billionaire. And there are two things about this man, or a couple of things. Trump just appointed him his Arab advisor for the Middle East. Second of all, he is associated with General Michel Aoun, who is the head of the Lebanese army and the head of the only Christian faction that is solidly aligned with Hezbollah. And lastly, he made his money, this Mr. Bulos, in Nigeria, where he has his businesses, where he made his billions. Now, West Africa is known as, it's part of what's called the Lebanese diaspora. And a lot of businesses going on, most of which is illegal, and most of which is under the control of Hezbollah. And it's highly unlikely that Mr. Bulos, who has made billions out of Nigeria, his business enterprises centered in Nigeria, would not have been involved with Hezbollah at one level or another. Hezbollah is, like the mafia, is very, very professional about going up to people and saying, you like to operate here, you like to live do you love your family, then you pay protection money. Or, you just give us money because you support our cause, like your friend, General Aoun. So this guy is very troubling, and he's angling to become the next U.S. ambassador to Lebanon. I don't know what Trump will do with that, but this is an objective of his. So you have that issue. First, Trump's desire to be a man of peace, not war, and now his elevation of this guy with a rather dodgy past to be his Arab affairs advisor for the Middle East and possibly the next ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Lebanon. So is there a possibility that on the day that Donald Trump once again becomes president of the United States, he tells us, basically, Bibi, I like this ceasefire, and you will withdraw to your positions within Israel and to permit the Lebanese army, which is completely under the control of Hezbollah, to go ahead and occupy all of southern Lebanon, right up to the border. Now, this is why many of the, if not all of the mayors in northern Israel on the border, the frontier mayors and the regional directors, have warned their people, don't come back. Don't come back. So if Trump basically says to Bibi, I like this ceasefire, there's peace, and I want the Lebanese army to continue to occupy or reoccupy southern Lebanon, and I don't want you initiating any military action, unless it's in self-defense, of course. What are we going to do in that case? Because we've built up this presumed support that he will give us, that Trump will give us, to do anything. And that isn't, I don't believe that's a correct reading of the situation with him. Now, he will say, from what friends of mine in Washington have been telling me, that we are to look at Iran as the major issue that we should handle. Okay, but what does that mean? Iran, major issue? Trump fully believes in his maximum pressure alternative to all-out war against Iran. He believes very strongly that economic pressure can coerce, if you will, the Iranians into stopping their nuclear weapons program and to stop their destabilization activities throughout the region. So it's possible, probable, actually, that the Arab petrostates in the Persian Gulf will support this because they'll be in support of anything that doesn't run the risk of an Iranian retaliatory strike against their own oil and gas facilities. So where does that leave us? What exactly are we supposed to do then? Everybody that I've been reading in the media says, oh, he'll allow us to attack Iran. I'm not so sure about that. Or if he does, quote, allow us, end quote, to attack Iran, it will be with a caveat that we not go after the oil and gas facilities or even the nuclear facilities, that we, just repeat what we've done in the past, pinpoint attacks against military objectives. Well, nobody has been able to refute this possibility that I've talked to, either here or in Washington. The bottom line is that we may have seriously misread his actual intentions upon assuming the office of the presidency, and that he would like to maintain his image as a peacemaker by forcing us to adhere to this horrible ceasefire that will, in effect, once the Lebanese army comes south and allows all of the Shiites who used to inhabit all these Hezbollah villages along the border and who were basically the family of the Hezbollah soldiers or terrorists that were occupying those jumping off positions for the invasion of the Galilee, we're back to October 6th. We can't do anything at that point because President Trump wants us to keep the peace. And as far as Iran is concerned, I'm not entirely sure, nor is anybody else of note that I've contacted, sure that he will allow us to launch the kind of military strike against the Iranian nuclear establishment or even their oil and gas establishment that will basically remove their threat from our necks and from the necks of the Arab petrostates as well. So this is the danger that our leaders, so-called leaders here, really aren't addressing. I mean, Bibi sent Sarah Netanyahu, to Mar-a-Lago to see Trump. Why? I guess she wanted to see the place. What sense does this make? She's not a diplomat. She's not a strategist. Why did she go there? Because, she wants to be in the news? I have no idea. But this is a joke, sending her, of all people, to Mar-a-Lago. What is that meant to accomplish? I don't know. But it's not serious.
Does she perhaps have a very warm, close relationship with Trump and his wife?
Well, I wouldn't believe it would be with his wife. It might be with Trump, but I wouldn't want to go there since I wouldn't want to impugn her reputation.
I wasn't suggesting anything untoward. I was just saying that perhaps there's some warm, cordial relationship between them, and she's a kind of envoy. I don't know.
No, she wanted to go, period. And Bibi, as usual, caved and let her go. I mean, she wasn't accompanied by any diplomats or strategists or anybody like that. She wanted to go. And this is why, this regime right now that we have.
I could suggest a possible explanation for that. Again, I'm not speaking from real knowledge, but Netanyahu certainly has discovered, he's known this for a long time, but certainly of late, that he can trust almost no one. And maybe he had some message that he wanted to convey to Trump directly and personally without any intermediaries with whom he might have some issues.
Could have sent Ron Dermer.
Could have.
Ron is a splendid intermediary diplomat.
And he's the closest person to Netanyahu.
Correct. And loyal to a fault. So I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes foreign leaders assume that if there is some kind of personal relationship with the president, that he will be amenable to subsequent diplomatic initiatives by them. And if this was just a family visit, I think probably that's what their thinking was, but I'm not sure. And under the circumstances right now, I considered it embarrassing. It's not professional. So
perhaps we'll
I don't know what we're going to do. If he does that, I've asked people here, what happens if he does this with the ceasefire? What are we going to do? And I get blank stares because they can't imagine that happening. But it could. There's a very good possibility if Hezbollah is halfway intelligent and just doesn't do anything and just continues in the wake of the Lebanese army's reoccupation of the south, rebuild all of their capabilities for the invasion of the Galil. What are we going to do?
It should be stated plainly that every single village within at least 8 kilometers of the border
Correct.
in the failed non-state of Lebanon every one of those villages was basically, not basically, it was entirely, completely, unequivocally forward staging points and fortresses of Hezbollah. Yeah, they were manned by their people, by their fighters.
with their families.
And their families are joined them as well because they have to live somewhere, and
Right.
and they're willing to live there. They get a house for free, and they will rebuild these houses now that were destroyed for free, and
Correct.
they will restock and replenish all their weapons depots and supplies and underground tunnels and what
Command
have you.
centers.
Yeah,
Right.
we're talking about it's like, take an American military base. So you have the personnel who are the active military personnel, people who actually do what the army needs to do, what the Air Force needs to do, what have you, and they live on the base with their families.
Correct. That's the analogy that has to be
That's
used.
precisely what we're talking about. No, without exception, there wasn't a single home. So it was reported by tens and hundreds of soldiers who were there, including people with whom I have spoken personally. There was not a single home that was not
Militarized.
fortified and stocked to the teeth with munitions and all kinds of
Bunkers,
equipment
munitions.
and bunkers and tunnels and what have you, and various supply depots, what have you. Every single home was part of this chain of fortresses on the border, forward stations of the Hezbollah, which is another way of saying of Iran. So it's an Iran's forward-based army against Israel on our doorstep.
Right. And soon I feel confident that there'll be hordes of poor displaced Shiites confronting our soldiers. It'll make great viewings for CNN and BBC and other
Great fake
Western
news.
media.
Great fake news.
All
Yes.
fake news with kids crying and screaming they want to go home, and people saying they have to return to their quote farms, and Israeli soldiers, barring them and being portrayed as these evil occupying monsters. Again, this is all predictable. It's all predictable. So again, I'd like people who are listening to this podcast to think, what are our options going to be? What would our options be? What will they be if Trump insists that we continue to honor this fake ceasefire with this current government,
which was imposed on us by
blackmail?
by the Biden administration.
Correct.
With threats of UN sanctions, not exercising a veto, further arms embargoes, etc. The question
Correct.
is, therefore, to what extent Trump will be willing to reverse those policies. So that is a big question mark for now, and we shall have to wait and see. Moving on, as we said earlier, this neck of the woods never allows one to become bored or complacent. And lo and behold, just a couple of days ago, we learned that the Syrian civil war has been rekindled. And the question is, where did that come from? Who is behind it? Did anyone predict this? It's obvious why it began now. It has been rekindled now because the Sunni ISIS type forces that were not completely eradicated in Syria by Hezbollah and Iran and Russia, who came to the aid of Assad in, I think it was 2011, 2012, 2013, according to the Gregorian calendar. That's when the so-called Arab Spring, more correctly defined as perhaps the Arab Winter or the Arab, I'm not quite sure, Arab War, certainly not a spring, didn't lead to anything very positive or verdant or desirable.
Constructive.
So these forces, which apparently were still in Syria and perhaps in a state of hibernation, have all of a sudden come back to life, clearly because they feel that Iran has been weakened and Hezbollah has been very seriously weakened, and Iran is also now somewhat both weakened and deterred from getting involved, and perhaps not really capable of helping Assad terribly much right now. Not to mention that Russia too also has its problems, as we know. I heard recently that Russia is losing something like 2,000 soldiers per day in
Per
the
day.
in the
The
Ukraine.
average life expectancy of a Russian conscript is about 48 hours.
Which, of
Pretty
course,
bleak.
another discussion. How many soldiers does he have left? How long can he keep that up? And the Ukrainians, by the way, are very much in the same position.
Correct.
At any rate, so it's obvious why those forces, those Sunni, ISIS, anti-Shiite, anti-Iran, anti-Assad forces, have all of a sudden come back to life and have overrun certain areas in Syria. How do you read this development, and where do you think it will lead us?
I think that what happened was when the Islamist forces were bottled up in northern Syria, in an area called Idlib. The Turks came in. Erdogan basically sent in forces to man the frontier of this rebel-controlled province and proceeded to re-equip and retrain these forces. Remember, Erdogan is a big supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. So these groups, various groups, were kindred souls as far as Erdogan is concerned. And of course, he has what can best be described as a neo-Ottoman perspective on areas like Syria.
Imperialist perspective.
Imperial attitudes towards Syria. So they were trained, and if you look at them now, they're beautifully equipped. They seem to know what they're doing. And just today, if there's been any question about who's actually been behind this offensive, the rebels displayed on the walls of the Aleppo citadel the Turkish flag and the Palestinian Authority flag. So it's quite clear who's directing this offensive. The Syrian army is just falling apart, completely falling apart. So the question that I was asked several days ago is, what would an intervention look like by the Iranians or the Russians, for that matter? And I answered the following way. If the Russians did want to intervene in some way, if they could spare troops or scrape something together, it would probably be an airborne division, which are pretty well trained, a lot of ex-Wagner mercenaries, and long-range aviation bombers out of Iranian base, staging out of Iranian bases. The real heavy lifting, though, would be done by the Iranians. And if they were to project an expeditionary force through northern or central Iraq to Syria, it would probably involve something like Army mechanized infantry division and a Revolutionary Guard Corps division size formation as well, and be augmented by Iraqi proxy forces, a Shiite militia. Well, today I can check one box off. The Iraqi Shiite militias are coming into the battle. Now, the proxy forces in Syria that is the Iranian-controlled proxy forces in Syria, are mostly in eastern Syria, and they'll be augmented immediately. And in southern Syria, facing our Golan. My guess is that if there is going to be an invasion or an intervention by Iran of some size, that those forces on the Golan Heights might do well to move east and not get cut off. Why? Well, Assad actually, according to Saudi sources, and take that for what it's worth, has been making requests of us to help him. Now, it's a Saudi source, so I wouldn't pay that much attention to it or give too much credibility to it. And the Saudis have a reason, by the way, for showing Assad sucking up to us to kind of discredit him. But it would make good military sense for those Iranian proxy forces along our Golan front to get out of harm's way. They don't want to be caught between us, the Druze, and a descending and vengeful Islamist force coming south from Damascus. Now, we have two potential allies in Syria that we have to be concerned about. One consists of the Druze communities in southern Syria. And a good friend of mine, David Mark, who's a very good strategic analyst, has indicated that what he thinks should happen is that we should basically provide a protective force for the Druze community that is quite concerned about the Islamists, because the Islamists will kill them, they'll kill Christians, they'll kill Kurds. They're kind of indiscriminate. If you're not an Islamist, you're a target. This would be a smart move on our part. It would also be a very smart move on our part to use our Air Force to target any Iranian proxy forces moving from southern Syria to join up with maybe an Iranian expeditionary force coming in through eastern Syria. That expeditionary force, by the way, coming across northern Iraq and possibly even central Iraq, is going to be on one road devoid of air cover or adequate air defenses. If we were smart, we could turn both of those roads, the one coming from the south and the one coming from the east, into the modern day equivalent of what the U.S. did to the retreating Iraqi forces out of Kuwait, turned them into roads of death. Whether we do that or not, I don't know. But I know in terms of the Kurds, they're next on the chopping block as far as the Turks are concerned.
That is always the central concern for the Turks, particularly for the imperialistic types amongst
Correct.
them. They fear nothing more. They fear more than anything a resurgent Kurdistan.
Correct. They're deathly afraid of that. So when somebody asked me yesterday, well, what can we do to help the Kurds? I mean, we can't get up there because it's a little bit far away from us, and we don't have any equipment to spare. And I immediately said, we've just inherited a massive, massive armory from Hezbollah in southern Lebanon that consists of very sophisticated Cornet anti-tank missiles, knockoffs of the Spike extended range anti-tank missile, surface-to-air missiles, SA-7s, SA-14s, mines, recoilless rifles. It's a cornucopia of very good military equipment. And the Israeli army, from what I understand, is prepared to blow all this stuff up. Well, this is crazy. Give it to the Kurds. Just give it to them. They're very disciplined. They're well-trained. They're fighting for their lives. And these are the equipments. Maybe we could augment it with satellite surveillance for them, and maybe kamikaze drones, just small ones, first-person viewing drones, so to speak. We would give them enough equipment to blunt any kind of Turkish advance on their positions in northern Syria, which we must defend. We have to tie the Turks up as much as we can. What I'm afraid of right now is that we are going to be trading an Iranian threat in Syria for a Turkish threat. And the Turks are far more dangerous, even though they don't have a nuclear weapons program right now. They are far more dangerous to us than the Iranians are. They have a very sophisticated military industrial complex that's turning out some first-rate equipment that would be very threatening to us if it were on our Golan border, far more than what the Iranians have deployed so far. So while I wouldn't encourage supporting Assad, what I would encourage doing is interdicting any kind of entry or movement of large numbers of Iranian or proxy forces within Syria, and also to provide a protective force for the Kurds, who are known as very good fighters and are willing to defend their homes and their region in southern Syria, and to provide all that equipment that we've inherited from the Hezbollah forces, to provide that to the Kurds, along with
that would make a lot of sense. And as my memory serves, this has been the suggestion and policy of people in the know for decades, that Israel
correct.
should form an alliance with the Kurds and be instrumental in creating a state for
Kurdish
the
state.
Kurds. The Kurds are an ancient people who would happily be allied with us.
Correct.
They would happily cooperate with us. It would be in their interest and in our interest. They have always, for centuries, they have been persecuted and massacred by the Turks, the Ottomans in the past, the Turks and the Syrians today. Their situation is dire, and they could change the face of the Middle East if there were to be a resurgent Kurdish state.
Correct. And we can
And you would think
that.
You would think that the US would understand this and be in favor of such a policy.
The problem there is that Trump actually likes Erdogan because he's a tough guy. That's the other problem. So unless we're going to do that right now, that is, supply the Kurds in northern Syria and offer a protective force to the Druze communities in southern Syria, I think this might be a little difficult under a Trump administration, because Erdogan would immediately complain that Israel is upsetting the balance of power in the Middle East, and they're acting aggressively, and they're destabilizing the region. And, Bibi will get a call.
That's rich coming from the new Ottoman emperor.
The Neo-Ottoman Empire, yeah, it is rich. But Erdogan has never been known as a straight shooter. He's the epitome of a hypocrite and a liar and a murderer. And
he's an extreme Islamist.
And an extreme Islamist. And these are, characteristics that unfortunately Trump might find rather appealing. He's a tough guy. He likes tough guys like Putin, like the Kim Jong-il in North Korea, and people of that ilk. So once again, we have to make moves now before Trump takes office in order to safeguard our interests, narrowly defined, in this region. And what better way of doing it than to offer protection to the Druze and maintain the hope of a Kurdish state that would be a natural ally to Israel.
Indeed, quite right. Now, to wrap up, we should discuss the new proposed legislation, a different one from the one we mentioned earlier, decriminalizing the obviously criminal and dastardly act of providing the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister with the information and intelligence required to do their job. This, of course, has everything to do with the truly outrageous Eli Feldstein case, who is still in custody.
Correct.
As far as I can tell, for no reason at all. He simply became aware of certain intelligence that had been deliberately suppressed and hidden from the eyes of the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister.
Correct.
And he made it his business to inform them of this. And this, by the way, is precisely what the well-known Agranat Commission that in the 1970s investigated the Yom Kippur War and why Israel was surprised at that time in Taushin Lamed Daled 1973. One of their recommendations was, because at that time also there was an intelligence failure for similar reasons to the more recent failure of a year and something ago. One of the recommendations was that any intelligence officer or any individual in the military who becomes aware of information and further becomes aware that it is not being passed up the chain of command to those who must see it is required, not may, but is obligated to go ahead and make that information known to the people who have to be aware of it. And that's exactly what he did. What we know that we're talking here not about a bona fide legal investigation or any kind of criminal activity. We're talking about the Shabak, the General Security Service, waging war against Netanyahu, against the Prime Minister, by the head of the Shabak. It should be also pointed out that by and large, the Shabak is made up of very good people who do a wonderful job. But the upper echelons of that organization are rotten and suspect to the core.
Correct. We have to understand that what we're talking about is the deep state. And the law that's on the books right now preventing concerned intelligence officers from sharing or providing critical information that is being to the Prime Minister and or Defense Minister that is being withheld from them by their superiors for, well, political reasons, has got to end. That law has got to end. Now, the Attorney General, our friend, is the one opposing this law. And the reason she's opposing it is Exhibit A as to why she should be removed from office. So, what is her defense of this law, of the current law? She claims that the new legislation, and I want to quote this just so people understand just how stupid she is.
The new legislation which would decriminalize the sharing of intelligence with those who must see it.
Must see it. She claims that such a new law could undermine the hierarchical nature of the security establishment. Now, when I saw that or read that, I thought it was a misquote, because no one could be that obtuse to actually utter those words.
It sounds like a Kamala Harris type word salad.
a rotten word salad at that, because it's kind of obvious with Kamala Harris. You were left confused as to what she meant. There's no danger of confusing what the Attorney General is saying in this case. I'm using a polite term. It's obtuse to make such a statement. The hierarchical nature of the security establishment is an obvious thing. You have ranks, you have departments, you have people in charge, but it's to facilitate the upward movement of critical intelligence to the decision makers, especially the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense. That's what this hierarchy is all about. It's not the stovepipe thing. It's not supposed to compress and to prevent information from ascending the hierarchy, which it is now for political reasons. You want to restrict intelligence and critical information if you're the deep state, and you want to control a prime minister or a defense minister that you don't really approve of. So while I in no way, shape, or form wish to excuse Benjamin Netanyahu for his role in precipitating the October 7th catastrophe, you have to be honest about this and admit that he was blindsided. Critical information was kept from him for political reasons. And the business with Elie Feldstein is just the latest example of where critical information was being withheld from the National Command Authority, from the Prime Minister, for political reasons, not security reasons. If you look at the information that was actually at issue here, the military, the intelligence community, and the security services are flat out lying when they claim that that information being compromised, that letter being compromised or revealed to the public, somehow compromised the Army's security. That it's a lie. That's all I can say.
Or compromise their sources, they claim.
That is, I know from my own experience, when you say it compromises sources and method, that's boilerplate. That's just something you throw on a case, and people, are like, "What are you talking about?" Well, sources and methods, but we can't go into it. Okay, I'm sorry. When this letter was leaked to Bild in Germany and to the Jewish Chronicle, the censors here had the opportunity to tell Netanyahu, you can't talk about it, because even talking about it after it's been published overseas, talking about it here could compromise military operations or codes or plans or whatever. But they didn't. They let him go ahead and talk about this letter, because there's nothing inherently dangerous security-wise about this letter, except if you were trying to undermine the Prime Minister's ability to justify slow walking the hostage negotiations with a group of terrorists that he knew had no intention of releasing our hostages. And for that reason, we needed to keep the Philadelphia corridor in our hands. So sources and methods, you can slap that on anything you want. I completely overlook. Every time I hear that, I just groan, and because I know it from my own case. And I just, overlook that completely. And people would be well served to overlook it also in this case. The bottom line on this is that this new law is absolutely essential, is rational, is needed, and is being opposed on grounds that can best be described as stupid by the Attorney General, who is obviously trying to defend the deep state, her deep state partners. in the security and military intelligence.
She is not stupid, but she is evil.
Totally evil. Totally evil.
And their motivations, when I say they, I refer to the juristocracy, the deep state, the unseen but very, very much felt network that runs this country, to the point that I should mention that a well-known former Hebrew University professor by the name of Avraham Diskin recently stated in an interview that as of 1993, that was the year that he mentioned, Israel has not been a democracy. And he went on to explain why this is so. Because at that time, the high priest of the juristocracy, Aaron Barak, made the name of the evil perish. Shem Roshaim Yerkav. At that time, at that time as president of the Supreme Court, so-called, made up out of thin air, without any legal justification, without any law or any precedent, claimed that the so-called Attorney General, who in Hebrew is not referred to as an Attorney General, but as Yoetz Mishpati LaMemshala, in other words, the legal advisor to the government. It is one of the faults of the Israeli system that the Attorney General and the legal advisor to the government is one and the same person. And this has been discussed for decades, that this cannot be the case for various reasons. At that time, Aaron Barak insisted that the legal opinions of that legal advisor to the government were not recommendations, but they were legally binding on the government. So essentially, from that moment onwards, the government is not the government, because the legal advisor can tell them, you can't do that, you must do this. So it's not a legal advisor, it's a supposedly legal, but in practice political apparatchik, who, or if you like, commissar, if you like. Essentially, it's a commissar of the woke
high
state that really gives the government its marching orders. And from that day onwards, so claims Avraham Diskin, former professor, who I should mention is not a religious man, not a right-wing individual, was known as a left-wing individual. He claims to have somewhat changed his views since the beginning of this war and the terrible massacre and attack. I don't know exactly what that means, but he claims to. I heard him interviewed about a year ago, and he said that he has changed his mind about certain things, or he no longer believes certain things that he did in the past. But he's certainly not on my wavelength or your wavelength. And yet he clearly stated in this interview recently that Israel is by no stretch of the imagination a democracy, and has not been for 31 years, since 1993. That's what he said. And he mentioned the date, he mentioned the name of the case in question, and then he went on to mention something else that happened in 1994. He says Israel is controlled by a juristocracy, a mafia-like juristocracy, and that's the honest truth. And therefore this so-called Attorney General, who is one of the leaders of this mafia today, she is opposed to this law about ensuring that intelligence moves up the chain to its proper address. Well, I think perhaps we'll leave it there for today, Jonathan.
Okay.
And we shall see what transpires till we meet next time. So till then, I wish you all the best, and all our viewers, of course, again, shalom, unitzahon, peace and victory over all our enemies, foreign and domestic.
Amen.
David Melech Yisrael, Hai v'Qayam. David, the King of Israel, is alive and well. Bezrat Hashem.
Amen.